All right, let's continue here in the chapter on civil rights. We're in slide number 19. I want you to just take a look at this. This is a segment of an essay written by James Madison called On Property that he wrote in 1792. But, he's talking about property. But what's interesting about the property that Madison talks about, he's talking about tangible property and intangible property, or material property that you can feel, hear, taste, touch, right? Pick up a chair, whatever, right? My property. But then there's intangible, immaterial property like your conscience, like your ideas. Okay, think if you got an idea and you developed a piece of software, or you wrote a song. Okay, that's something they call intellectual property. And what Madison is saying is both your tangible property and your intangible property deserves to be protected by the government. And one key part of it is your conscience, the freedom to, believe what you want to believe, okay? So here's what he says. He says, in a word, as a man is said to have a right to his property, he may equally be said to have a property in his rights. So rights are intangible. You can't see them. You can't see a right to free speech. You can't see a right to petition government. You can't see that right. You can't see it. Now, you can do it, but you can't see it, okay? That's what he's talking about, intangible. No man is safe in his opinions, his persons, his faculties, or his possessions. Where there is an excess of liberty, the net effect is the same, though from an opposite cause. Government is instituted to protect property of every sort, as well as that which lies in the various rights of individuals, as that which the term particularly expresses. This being the end of government, that alone is a just government, which impartially secures to every man whatever is own. And here's the punchline. Conscience is the most sacred of all property. Other property depending in part on positive law, the exercise of that being natural and unalienable right. So that is an expression of how the founders viewed freedom of religion or freedom of conscience. Okay, they said it's the most sacred. Again, because logically, so many of the other rights flow from it. If you lose that, you're going to lose speech, you're going to lose petition of government, you're going to lose assembly, you're going to lose a lot of things, okay? So it's got to be something that we don't look at as a constitutional redundancy, okay? But it's something that's critical, okay? So we're going to talk about the two different clauses of the First Amendment, okay? The Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Okay, so the Establishment Clause is the idea that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Okay, the idea that the federal government is not supposed to favor one religion over another, or promote one or the other. That's the argument. Okay. So the court case that established this, at least for the modern era, it was not this way from the late 1700s all throughout the 1800s, and even up to about the middle of the 20th century. It's only from 1947, in the case of Everson versus Board of Education, that the court shifted its viewpoint of the establishment of religion, okay? And in the case, Justice Hugo Black said that the First Amendment has erected a wall between church and state. The wall must be kept high and impregnable. We could not approve the slightest breach, okay? So from that argument, Black is saying that, basically this idea, there's got to be a wall. You cannot bring religion into the public sphere, into the schools, okay, or different things like that, okay. That's how he interpreted it, okay. But that is very different than how it was interpreted for the majority of America's founding and up to the present time, prior to Everson. There's a contrast. Okay, he called it a wall, but the founding generation and up until 1947, religion was looked more at like a tire spike. Okay, you ever been to a tire spike at a rental car company, or if you've been to the beach? I'm thinking Silver Beach in St. Joe. In other words, you can go in to the parking area and you can go out, but when you go out, there's a spike. So as you leave, those spikes go up, right? And if you try to back up, it's like, right? You're going to rip your tires apart, okay? So the idea of the founding era and then up until 1947 was religion can freely flow into the state, okay? The state cannot, okay, involve itself in religious matters, but religion can, again, by virtue of the fact that everyone has a conscience, okay? And so, but the Everson decision changed that and began to cause the Supreme Court to start striking down state laws that favored religion in public places, okay? Now, if you go to the next slide, the drawback of using Jefferson's wall of separation metaphor for religious liberty, okay? Basically, Thomas Jefferson, when he was president, okay, his election was very controversial. Jefferson was a deist, okay? He wasn't what you consider an Orthodox Christian. So he had a lot of kind of off-center views of Christianity. So there was a lot of concern within Americans that if he got elected, he would basically hinder religious expression within the country. So a group of Baptists in Connecticut wrote him a letter and said, listen, are you going to get involved in all this stuff, or are you going to leave it alone? And in his letter to the Danbury Baptists, he basically said, I'm paraphrasing, that, hey, I'm a member of the federal government. The federal government cannot get involved in the religious issues within a state because the Constitution has erected a wall of separation, okay? He interpreted it as the federal government cannot get in because there's a wall there. The Constitution prevents me as a federal officer from getting involved in state issues as it pertains to religion, okay? Hugo Black misinterpreted what Jefferson said, and he basically said, nope, you gotta get religion out of everything, okay? Why the use of Jefferson's wall of separation metaphor is problematic is because of a number of things, okay? First of all, the Danbury Baptist letter that he wrote to, that Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist was a short note of courtesy. It wasn't it wasn't an official governmental pronouncement. It's like a private letter. Okay. In other words, you can't use a private letter to interpret it as saying, listen, this is what the government wanted. Okay. Second of all, after he issued that the letter to the Baptists, Jefferson attended church services at, wait for it, the House of Representatives. Could you imagine that today? A church service in the House of Representatives? Wow. After he issued the letter to the Danbury Baptist, he pushed for federal aid for Catholic missionaries to evangelize the Kaskaskia Indians. You mentioned that again. The federal government, hey, listen, we're going to send $3 million to Baptist churches so they can go share the gospel over to Africa. Okay, people will be like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? But again, you get an expression of what they thought, that it was more like a tire spike than a wall. Okay, is the government couldn't interfere with religion, but religious expression could influence government in some way, shape, or form. Okay, kind of interesting. The other problem with this is that Thomas Jefferson was in France when the 14th Amendment was written. In other words, Thomas Jefferson is hardly the expert of the religious clause of the First Amendment because he wasn't even there. He wasn't even anywhere near America. James Madison would have been the expert to consult if Hugo Black had consulted correctly, okay? And finally, again, Jefferson had a less than ideal understanding of it because of all that distance, okay? But so all of that to say, the decision in Everson versus Board of Education was a very controversial one, okay? So the applications to Everson, again, we're talking about incorporation doctrine. We're talking about how the court has incorporated the 14th Amendment to begin to start striking down state laws, in this case, with regards to the establishment of religion. So in 1962, in Engel versus Vitale, the court held that no prayer in public schools. Okay, that was a very controversial decision. In 1963, in Abington versus Schempp, it held that it prohibits teachers having Bible reading in schools. In Wallace versus Joffrey, the government must pursue a course of complete neutrality towards religion. In other words, no silent prayer in schools. Again, you're seeing how incorporation doctrine began to strike down state laws that favored religion. Okay, other applications of Everson. Okay, slide number 23. Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe's. No student-led prayer at public football games, public school football games. Then Orden versus Perry. The court rejected a suit asking for the dismantling of a display of the Ten Commandments on a monument at the Texas State Capitol. And then in McCreary County versus American Civil Liberties Union, the exact opposite was decided by the court. The court struck down displays of the Ten Commandments on two Kentucky courthouses. excuse me, why this is interesting is the Ten Commandments is actually written on the wall of the Supreme Court building. So the court says you can't have it in Texas as they're looking at the wall where it's there in their building. So again, interesting, a lot of inconsistencies. Another aspect of Establishment Clause jurisprudence is the case called Lemon versus Kurtzman. Okay, if you look at slide number 24. Okay, so the court tried to find some sort of balancing test to determine whether or not government is promoting religion in a public school or in a public place. Okay, in a government place. Let me just say that, a government place. So they developed this three-pronged test. Number one, the statute must have a secular legislative purpose, and this must not advance religion. Its principal primary effect must be that it neither advances nor inhibits religion. And number three, the statute must not foster an excessive government entanglement with religion. Okay, so that's what the court has used to try to figure out, since 1971, whether or not a particular state law is violating the First Amendment Establishment Clause. Okay. It's been very controversial. There's been a lot of inconsistencies applied because of Everson. Okay, a great example of this. This is from the book that we wrote. Okay, this is actually from chapter 5 of the book, but this is from law professor Michael McConnell from the University of Chicago. Again, he's showing how after Everson, the court, in striking down a lot of state laws that advanced religious expression in schools or government places, is applied inconsistently, okay? He says this: it is constitutional for the government to give money to religiously affiliated organizations to teach adolescents about proper sexual behavior, but not to teach them science and history. It is constitutional for the government to provide religious school pupils with books, but not with maps, with bus rides to religious schools, but not from school to a museum on a field trip, but with cash to pay for state-mandated standardized tests, but not to pay for safety-related maintenance. It is a mess, okay? And Antonin Scalia, he's a chief justice. He's one of the justices on the Supreme Court. He passed away in 2016. He took issue with the Lemon test and said, listen, it's applied inconsistency. Again, I find this personally funny. He, in my opinion, is probably the funniest Supreme Court justice that's ever been on the bench. But he's talking about the inconsistent application of Everson there, okay? He says this. He says, like some ghoul in a late night horror. This is from an actual Supreme Court decision, okay? This is not just his personal writings. This isn't an official decision. Like some ghoul in a late night horror movie that repeatedly sits up in its grave and shuffles abroad after being repeatedly killed and buried, Lemon, the Lemon test, stalks our Establishment Clause jurisprudence once again, frightening the little children and the school attorneys. Its most recent burial, only last term, was, to be sure, not fully 6 feet under. Our decision in Lee versus Wiseman conspicuously avoided using the supposed test, but also declined the invitation to repudiate it. Over the years, however, no fewer than 5 of the currently sitting justices have, in their own opinions, personally driven pencils through the creature's heart. The author of today's opinion repeatedly, and a 6th has joined the opinion in doing so. The secret to Lemon's survival, I think, is that it is so easy to kill. It is there to scare us and our audiences when we wish it to do so, but we can command it to return to the tomb at will. When we wish to strike down a practice it forbids, we invoke, see Aguilar versus Fenton, okay, the particular test. When we wish to uphold a practice it forbids, we ignore it entirely, okay? Sometimes we take a middle course, calling its 3 prongs no more than helpful signposts. Such a docile and useful monster is worth keeping around, at least in a somnolent state. One never knows when one might need him, okay? He's being playful, okay? He's saying, listen, sometimes the court uses it, sometimes it doesn't. In other words, if this test was so good and solved for all time, Establishment Clause jurisprudence, we wouldn't be selectively applying it. We should be consistent, okay? So what I'm trying to show you is a lot of the Establishment Clause jurisprudence has been controversial, okay? I'm going to stop there, and we'll move on to Free Exercise Clause in the next video.